Picture this, a body, perfectly still, swathed in hundreds of yards of white linen, sealed inside a golden coffin, in a stone chamber cut deep into the living rock of a desert cliff. Outside, torches blaze. Priests chant in voices just above a whisper. The air is thick with cedar resin and myrrh, and everyone gathered, from the crown prince to the humblest servant, holds their breath, because what happens in the next hour will determine the fate of a soul, not for a lifetime, for eternity. For the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt, their most important journey wasn't on a battlefield, and it wasn't on a throne. It happened here, in the quiet, perfumed darkness at the entrance to a tomb. It was the final act of a drama, 70 days in the making. A ritual so precise, so powerful, so deeply believed, that without it, the soul of even the mightiest Pharaoh would dissolve into nothing, lost forever in the void between worlds. This ritual had a name. The Egyptians called it the Wepet-Ra, the opening of the mouth. And today, we are going inside it. We're going to follow a pharaoh from the moment of death through 70 days of sacred preparation, down to the very last rite performed at the threshold of eternity. We'll look at the tools used, the spells spoken, and the astonishing theology behind it all. And we'll ask the question the Egyptians themselves were asking: what does it actually mean to conquer death? Because this was never just a funeral. It was a resurrection protocol, a meticulously engineered, spiritually loaded performance designed to reboot the soul. And the consequences of getting it wrong were not just tragic, they were permanent. The Egyptians had a name for it: the second death. Not the death of the body, but the death of the soul. A final, irrevocable extinction. Stay with me, because we are about to witness one of the most extraordinary ceremonies in all of human history.
To understand why the opening of the mouth ceremony existed at all, you have to first understand how the ancient Egyptians thought about what a human being actually is. For them, a person wasn't simply a body with a soul. A person was a complex constellation of spiritual components, all working in tandem. And when death came, that constellation shattered. The two most critical pieces were the Ka and the Ba. Think of the Ka as your vital force, the animating energy that made you alive, the invisible double that was born alongside you and stayed with you your entire life. The Ka wasn't a ghost. It was closer to a life force, the part of you that needed food, drink, warmth, and connection. After death, your Ka remained in and around the tomb, dependent on offerings left by the living. Starve the Ka, and it suffered. This is why tomb walls are covered in images of food, beer, wine, and grain, not as decoration, but as magical insurance. Even if the physical offerings stopped coming, the images would sustain the Ka forever through the power of Egyptian sacred art. The Ba was different. Where the Ka was your life force, the Ba was your personality, your character, your memories, your unique identity. Everything that makes you distinctly you. In tomb paintings, the Ba is shown as a human-headed bird because it could fly. After death, the Ba was free to leave the tomb, to visit the sunlit world of the living, to soar above the Nile. But it always had to return to the body at night. The body was the Ba's home port, the anchor it needed to remain a coherent self. But there were more components still. The Ib, the heart, was the seat of intelligence, conscience, and moral memory, the very thing that would be weighed in the final judgment. The Shut was your shadow, also understood as a spiritual element. The Ren was your name, literally your identity spoken aloud, so important that destroying a person's name from all inscriptions was the most complete form of damnation Egypt could devise. And the Ak, the radiant, transformed being that you hoped to become, was the ultimate goal. An Ak was a glorified spirit, a being of pure light and power, capable of living alongside the gods forever. So here's the crisis death created. The moment a person died, these components scattered. The Ka and Ba were severed from the physical body. The integrated being that had walked and breathed and thought was suddenly fragmented, pieces drifting in different directions. And unless something was done, something dramatic and precise and ritually exact, those pieces would never reunite. The Ba would wander without an anchor. The Ka would starve, and the Ak would never come into being. A mummy, then, wasn't simply a preserved corpse. It was a carefully constructed permanent home for the soul, an eternal vessel waiting to receive the fragments back. The goal of mummification, of the tomb, of every amulet and spell and painted wall, was to hold those pieces together long enough for the deceased to make their journey through the underworld and emerge, transformed as an Ak. But there was still one more problem. Even the most perfect mummy was still, in its immediate state, an inert object. Its mouth was wrapped shut, its eyes were closed. How could it speak the passwords required to pass through the gates of the underworld? How could it breathe the sacred air of the field of reeds? How could it receive the offerings its Ka desperately needed? You can't enter eternity silent and blind. That's where the opening of the mouth came in. Its origins reach back deep into the Old Kingdom. As far as we can trace Egyptian writing, this ritual or something very close to it was already there. We find early versions of it in the pyramid texts, those astonishing inscriptions carved inside the pyramids of Saqqara around 2400 BCE, which are among the oldest religious writings on earth. But the ceremony wasn't only for mummies. It was performed on statues of gods when they were first installed in temples. A ritual act that transformed cold carved stone into a living divine presence. The same sacred logic applied. Until the mouth was opened, the statue was just an object. After the ceremony, it was a home for a god. That's the power this ritual claimed. And for millions of Egyptians across 3,000 years of history, it was not mythology, it was reality. The moment a pharaoh drew their last breath, a clock started, and it was running fast. The body begins to decompose almost immediately. In the heat of the Egyptian desert, that process accelerates ruthlessly. The Egyptians had, through centuries of careful observation and refinement, developed a method to stop that process completely, to freeze the body in a state of permanent, preserved readiness for the soul's return. We call it mummification. They understood it as something closer to transfiguration. The entire process took 70 days. This wasn't arbitrary. 70 days is the period during which the star Sirius, Sopdet to the Egyptians, the star of the goddess Isis, disappears below the horizon before its annual reappearance. That reappearance coincided with the Nile's flood, the annual renewal of life. So 70 days was a cosmically meaningful period of transformation, a time between death and rebirth mirrored in the heavens. The work fell to a specialized group of priests and embalmers operating in a purified workshop called the Wepet, the pure place, or the Pernefer, the house of beauty. The chief officiant was the Sem priest, a figure we'll return to. But the hands-on work was led by the hairy Sesheta, the master of secrets, who often wore a jackal mask to embody Anubis, the god of embalming, the divine guardian of the dead. The process began with ritual purification, the body washed with Nile water and palm wine. Then came the most confronting step, evisceration. A precise incision was made on the left side of the abdomen, typically about 4 inches long, just wide enough for the embalmer's hand. The stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs were carefully removed. These organs are the first to decompose, and leaving them inside would have destroyed the body from within. But they were not discarded, they were sacred. Each organ was cleansed, dried, and eventually placed in one of 4 canopic jars, each one stoppered with the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imseti, the human-headed guardian of the liver, Hapi, the baboon-headed guardian of the lungs, Duamutef, the jackal-headed guardian of the stomach, and Kebasenuef, the falcon-headed guardian of the intestines. The heart was treated differently. Almost always the heart was left inside the chest. In Egyptian thought, the heart, the ib, was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and moral memory. It was the organ that would be weighed in the Hall of Two Truths against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of divine justice. The deceased needed their heart for that moment. Without it, there could be no judgment. And without judgment, no passage into the afterlife. To guard against the heart speaking against its owner, a real and terrifying possibility in Egyptian theology. A carved heart scarab amulet was often placed over the chest, inscribed with chapter 30 of the Book of the Dead, a spell commanding the heart to remain silent and not testify against the deceased. With the organs removed, the body cavity was rinsed with palm wine and packed with temporary stuffing. Then came the great preservation agent, natron. Natron is a naturally occurring salt compound, a mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, found in dry lake beds in the Egyptian desert, most famously at Wadi Natrun. It is both a desiccant and a mild antibacterial. The embalmers used it in extraordinary quantities, covering the body inside and out, completely burying it in a mound of natron on a slightly tilted table so that fluids could drain away. There the body lay for 40 days. 40 days of silence, 40 days of drying. When the body emerged, it was dramatically changed, darkened, shrunken, desiccated, but magnificently preserved. The embalmers then rinsed it again, anointed it with a complex blend of oils, resins, and aromatics, cedarwood oil, frankincense, myrrh, juniper oil, beeswax, not only for preservation, but for their sacred and symbolic properties. Myrrh was associated with the divine. Cedar repelled insects and decay. These were the scents of eternity. The body cavity was then packed with linen, sawdust, and aromatic materials to restore a lifelike shape. Sunken cheeks were sometimes plumped with linen padding. Eyes, now collapsed, were replaced with linen pads, or, in later periods, with polished stone or glass eyes that gave the mummy a startlingly lifelike gaze. Then came the wrapping. This was the most time-consuming and ritually precise stage of all. Each finger was wrapped individually, each toe, the limbs, the torso, the head, all wrapped in layer upon layer of fine white linen, often sourced from the temples themselves, consecrated fabric that carried divine power. A royal mummy might use hundreds of square meters of linen, applied over the course of 15 days or more. As the priests wrapped, they placed magical amulets between the layers with precise intentionality. The Jed pillar amulet, symbol of Osiris's backbone and stability, went over the chest. The Tayet knot, the blood of Isis, was placed at the throat. The Wadjet eye, the eye of Horus, the symbol of wholeness and protection, went over the incision on the side. Gold-tipped finger and toe stalls protected the extremities. Every layer, every amulet was accompanied by spoken spells, transforming the bandaging into an act of continuous magical inscription. The result was a being that was no longer quite human and not yet divine, suspended between the two, waiting. The mummy, now placed in its innermost coffin, was a masterpiece of both craft and theology. It was the most sacred object in the Egyptian world, but it was still silent, still sealed. Its senses were still locked. For that to change, it had to be brought to the tomb, and it was time to move. We're about to step across the threshold. We're about to enter the tomb, stand in the lamplight, and witness the moment that everything, 70 days of sacred work, a lifetime of faith, comes down to. Everything we're about to see comes directly from the ancient Egyptians themselves, from the walls of tombs like that of the vizier Rekhmir at Thebes, from the sacred texts of the Book of the Dead and its older predecessors, from the physical objects that have survived 4,000 years to land in museum collections around the world. This is their story, told in their own images and words. If this kind of deep dive into the ancient world is the reason you're here, do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It tells the algorithm this content is worth sharing, and it helps us keep making these journeys into the past.